The trial and sentencing of the guards at Bergen Belsen after World War II have remained a source of controversy for decades. On April 15, 1945, near Celle, Germany, British troops from the 11th Armored Division arrived at Bergen Belsen. What they saw did not resemble a typical prisoner of war camp. The scene before them defied comprehension, still, cold, and bearing the marks of a nightmare that had just passed. A heavy, eerie silence hung over the camp. An unfamiliar odor lingered in the damp air, spreading through the decaying wooden barracks. Faint echoes came from within. The surroundings were painted in a dull gray. Dry dust and withered grass covered the ground. The rows of huts appeared desolate, like ruins left behind after a storm. All around, the remains of those who perished lay still on the cold earth, thin, lifeless, and silent. They didn't move. Some still clutched the last remnants of torn cloth. Children sat frozen, eyes wide open, following every step of the British soldiers. Adults clung to rusted tin cans or worn-out shoes, hands trembling. Many areas were abandoned, cluttered between the rows of huts. Outdoor latrines, long unused, stood caked in dust, revealing a total collapse of hygiene and basic care. Signs of neglect were everywhere, rats scavenging through leftover scraps, shredded blankets, rotting wooden bunks. The silence was suffocating. Each barracks sunk in darkness and damp. The British Army quickly restored order and established command at the entrance to the camp. They shifted from combat operations to a humanitarian mission. An emergency coordination center was set up, folding tables, maps spread out, and a radio transmitter. The Union Jack was planted in the muddy ground next to the barbed wire fence. A commanding officer stood tall and gave a clear order. "We need doctors!" Immediately, soldiers moved quickly, carrying communication equipment, preparing to assess the situation. Every action was organized like a military operation. But this time, the objective was to save lives. Inside the wooden barracks, the air was thick and suffocating. These spaces held people so exhausted they could barely move. They lay huddled on the cold ground, their bodies severely weakened. The camp's medical system had completely collapsed. There were no medicines, no clean water, no antibiotics. The typhus epidemic was spreading uncontrollably. Many of those in critical condition hadn't received any care for weeks. A medic stepped into the first barracks. His eyes scanned the motionless figures. With every step, the weight of the disaster became more apparent. Emergency aid began immediately. Army medical teams from field hospitals near Celle and Lüneburg were deployed, bringing basic medical supplies. Trucks carrying clean water tanks rolled into the camp, leaving deep tire tracks in the dirt. To control insects and disease, white powdered disinfectant was scattered across the barracks. A fine layer of dust settled on the floors and clothing, part of the effort to protect the remaining survivors. Medical tents were set up next to the old barracks, equipped with makeshift exam tables and basic supplies. Survivors were carefully sorted. Some were in critical condition, others were weak, or showing signs of infectious disease. Each person was examined, documented, and transferred to a designated area. Relief teams moved continuously, focused eyes, hands never resting. Some soldiers were pulled out of the camp area just hours after arrival, due to concerns about health risks from exposure to the environment. A young nurse, her white uniform stained with mud, sat beside a frail child. The child stared at her without blinking, eyes deep and hollow, as if they had seen too much. "I don't know where to begin," she whispered, clutching a thin blanket in her hands. A doctor bent down to check the child's condition, then silently signaled his team to begin. A flashlight beam swept across tired faces in the dark. The doctor's quiet command echoed in the silence, repeating like an unspoken order. British troops moved through each barrack, trying to assist the remaining survivors. Many SS guards had already fled before the British arrived, leaving their uniforms behind on the barrack floors. Some had vanished into the nearby woods, their whereabouts still unknown. On one side, there was a desperate effort to save lives. On the other, the disappearance of those who once held the fate of thousands in their hands. A single question hung heavy in the air: who allowed Bergen-Belsen to fall into such a state? And then the hunt began. Immediately after stabilizing relief efforts, British officers issued an order. All personnel who had served at Bergen-Belsen were to be identified and detained for investigation. This included SS guards, administrative officers, medical staff, logistics workers, and camp officials. The camp was sealed off. The barbed wire fence now served as a control boundary, restricting movement for those under suspicion. British troops moved quickly to block all exit routes. Camp personnel lists were reviewed and cross-checked with testimonies from surviving prisoners. Documents were found in poor condition. Uniforms had been abandoned in the barracks. Each barrack was thoroughly searched for traces of those who had fled. Some suspects were believed to have blended into the crowd, concealed their identification papers, or hidden within the campgrounds. The sound of barking dogs echoed as search teams fanned out. Upon capture, identified SS members were separated and transferred to a secured holding area for interrogation. Within 4 days, over 80 SS personnel, both men and women, were identified and taken into custody. Nearby civilian areas were also placed under quarantine as a precaution against the spread of disease. Irma Grace became one of the most notorious figures associated with the camp. Only 21 years old, she had a reputation for cruelty, even among her SS colleagues. According to many survivors, she was known by a name that sent chills: the Angel of Death. Grace was arrested on site, still wearing her SS uniform. She offered no resistance and showed no signs of fear. Another key figure arrested was Joseph Kramer, the camp commandant. Since December 1944, he had been in charge of Bergen-Belsen. Prior to that, he had served at Auschwitz. The nickname, the Beast of Belsen, appeared in numerous post-war military reports and media accounts, describing the brutality he was accused of. When the British forces arrived, he offered no resistance. Kramer calmly escorted officers around the camp, pointing out each building, including those still bearing signs of disaster. His composed demeanor throughout the tour left many deeply unsettled. Alongside him was Elizabeth Volkenrath, the chief female overseer, who was also identified by female prisoners. She was found in a supply depot, still wearing her camp official uniform. When escorted out, she remained silent. They had patrolled the women's compound and supervised punishments. Some had also participated in selection processes that would later have grave consequences. Many had come from Auschwitz or Ravensbrück, bringing with them a background of cruelty. The investigation began on site. British troops questioned each person, recording detailed notes. Survivors, most still too weak to stand, began pointing out individual SS guards. Though fragmented and emotionally charged, their testimonies were enough to identify several suspects as playing significant roles in the camp's operations. These early testimonies would form the foundation for future prosecutions. SS personnel were separated from the prisoners and held in a secured area under tight guard. Some were transferred to detention facilities near Lüneburg, awaiting trial. A British soldier stood guard, looking over a long list of names spread across the table. He folded the paper without saying a word and stepped outside. The British forces ordered the captured SS guards to assist in the recovery process. Those who had died were buried respectfully. The SS personnel were made to dig graves and transport the dead to designated burial sites under close supervision. The work went on for hours until the burials were completed. By April 20th, 1945, Bergen-Belsen was fully under British control. Dozens of SS staff were in custody. A comprehensive disinfection campaign was launched, involving sanitation and pest control. Survivors were transferred to field hospitals or refugee centers in nearby Bergen. They were housed in clean tents, provided with drinking water, warm blankets, and attended by medical staff. Despite regaining control, the camp remained a dangerous place, both physically and psychologically. Typhus continued to claim lives, even as Army medical teams worked around the clock. Sanitary conditions were dire, with insect infestations and waste accumulating under the old wooden floors. The barracks, decayed and disease-ridden, were no longer usable. After several days of assessment, the British made a final decision. In early May 1945, Bergen-Belsen was to be destroyed. The demolition process began. British soldiers used specialized equipment to burn down each barrack in a controlled manner. Flames spread evenly across the rotting wooden structures, following a carefully planned route. Thick black smoke rose high into the sky, carrying the scent of burning wood and chemicals. Each hut was set ablaze under supervision. The Army ensured the fire did not spread to the nearby forest. The crackling of splintering wood echoed through the still air, mixed with the sound of wind sweeping over the ashes. The objective was clear: to prevent disease outbreaks and protect nearby German villages as well as British troops. The risk of an epidemic was brought under control thanks to strict hygiene and quarantine measures. After the burning ended, all that remained were ashes and charred wooden stakes. Mass burial sites were sealed off and marked with simple signs. Warning boards were posted around the area, clearly stating the dangers of potential contamination. Bergen-Belsen, once the site of imprisonment for tens of thousands, was now an empty field, covered in ash and memories. British soldiers stood silently as the flames died down. The heavy atmosphere had not lifted. Inside the investigation room, witness testimonies and lists of camp personnel lay ready on the table. More than 80 people had been arrested. But what about the hundreds of others? Where were they when the orders were carried out? Justice had begun to move, slowly but surely. After the camp was liberated and burned to prevent disease, British forces shifted their focus to investigation and legal accountability. British military police and war crimes investigators launched a meticulous campaign. Their mission was clear: to bring SS personnel and associated staff to justice for their roles in the events at the camp. The investigation continued without pause from May to August 1945. They began by interviewing hundreds of survivors, many of whom were still recovering in field hospitals and refugee shelters. Investigators, carrying notebooks and typewriters, sat across from survivors, whose eyes still bore the weight of unhealed memories. Testimonies were recorded in detail, often through interpreters, and the sessions lasted for hours. The content was disturbingly repetitive: beatings, starvation, and the selection process that cost many their lives. The second task was to collect physical evidence. Investigation teams combed the camp area before. It was destroyed. They uncovered torn documents listing prisoner names, transport records, and SS personnel files. Some papers were buried in the ash but still legible. They contained names, titles, and assigned duties within the camp, ranging from ration distribution to medical oversight and processing of incoming prisoners. Hundreds of photographs, including those taken by Sergeant A.N. Migley and the military film unit, captured the chaos: areas filled with bodies, SS guards under supervision clearing the dead, and the hollow stairs inside the abandoned barracks. These pieces of evidence were packed, labeled, and sent to legal teams. The objective was clear: to connect each individual to specific actions carried out during the operation of Bergen-Belsen. At temporary offices in Lüneburg, the legal team processed the information with the precision of a machine. They sifted through hundreds of witness statements, cross-referenced them with photographs and documents. Each name was evaluated: who had command responsibility, who was present during key incidents, and to what extent each person was involved. By August 1945, the list of defendants was finalized: 45 individuals, including 25 men and 20 women. Many had been detained as early as April, such as Joseph Kramer and Irma Grisa. Others had fled into nearby forests or blended in with the civilian population. They were tracked down and arrested in surrounding towns. The list included a full range of personnel: camp commandants, officers, female overseers, warehouse managers, and administrative staff. All had played a part in the harsh regime of Bergen-Belsen. The charges were drafted in accordance with international conventions on war crimes, focusing primarily on crimes against humanity, a legal category recognized by international law. Allegations included systematic harm, prolonged mistreatment, forcing prisoners to live under inhumane conditions, and the willful denial of medical care. To maintain a tight legal focus, prosecutors chose to restrict the case to acts committed specifically at Bergen-Belsen, not extending it to other camps such as Auschwitz or Dachau, even though many defendants had served there. Each charge was supported by concrete evidence: handwritten orders, transport lists, scene photographs, and witness testimonies. One photo showed Greece standing in the middle of an area where the aftermath was still visible. One document recorded Kramer recommending the reduction of food rations to eliminate the weakest, as noted in a confiscated file. Each piece of evidence helped reconstruct how the camp system had operated and the impact it had on those imprisoned. September 17th, 1945, in Lüneburg, northwestern Germany. The Belsen trial, the first major war crimes trial organized by the British, opened in a modest courtroom. The atmosphere was solemn, nearly silent, broken only by the rustling of paper and the reading of the indictment. In front of the court stood 45 defendants, lined up, no longer in SS uniforms, only plain civilian clothing. More than 100 international journalists documented every detail. Their eyes scanned every corner of the courtroom. Survivors, some arriving on crutches, appeared to testify. Every word was translated into multiple languages to ensure clarity. The prosecution presented the evidence in a methodical manner. They screened footage taken on the day of the camp's liberation, showing the aftermath and SS guards being supervised as they handled the corpses. Documents were submitted, lists of prisoners during selection phases, along with transport orders to special processing camps. One assignment chart showed Greece was in charge of order in the women's section, where many abuses occurred. An internal memo confirmed that Kramer had personally ordered a reduction in rations, causing prisoners to gradually waste away. Witnesses took the stand, speaking in steady voices as they recounted what they had seen. One recalled witnessing Greece physically assaulting a female prisoner for misaligning in the queue. The reason: she had stood in the wrong row. A man testified that Kramer had allegedly been present when a starving prisoner collapsed and received no assistance. Each testimony pierced through the courtroom's heavy silence. The defendants were given a chance to respond. Some, like Kramer, spoke in a calm tone, insisting they were simply following orders. Greece denied the beatings, though her eyes never left the floor. A few admitted to their actions, but argued they had no authority to stop the violence. Defense attorneys claimed their clients had been coerced, trapped within the machinery of the SS. The court rejected that argument. The prosecution countered, in all circumstances, individuals still have choices. No one was forced to participate in acts of brutality. No one was compelled to turn away from another's suffering. International journalists followed the proceedings closely, documenting every detail. The trial lasted more than 2 months. Each day brought a steady flow of testimonies and new evidence. On November 17, 1945, the verdict was announced. Most of the defendants were found guilty. 11 were sentenced to the highest penalty, including Joseph Kramer and Irma Grese. Kramer, the camp commandant, was found to have played a direct role in the system that led to the deaths of tens of thousands. Grese, accused of violent behavior, was convicted for her role in the cruel treatment of prisoners. 19 others received prison sentences, ranging from 10 to 15 years, depending on their level of involvement. 7 were acquitted due to insufficient evidence. Some had only arrived at the camp shortly before its liberation. The British court upheld strict legal standards. The just following orders defense was wholly dismissed. The judges emphasized, every individual has a choice. No one is exempt from accountability when it comes to crimes against humanity. As the verdicts were read, the courtroom fell silent. Some survivors lowered their heads, hands clenched. Journalists scribbled rapidly, the sound of pens brushing paper. The defendants were led out, their footsteps echoing across the wooden floor. After more than 2 months, judgment had been rendered, marking the first step on the long path toward justice. The testimonies, images, and documents from Bergen Belsen became indelible evidence of SS crimes. The trial did not only hold individuals accountable, it laid the foundation for future prosecutions, including the Nuremberg trials. History cannot erase what happened at Bergen Belsen, but that trial, though only a beginning, opened the first door to justice. December 1945, Hamelin Prison, Lower Saxony, Germany. The 11 individuals sentenced to the highest penalty in the Belsen trial were transferred from Lüneburg to the prison, now under British military control. Joseph Kramer, Irma Grese, Elisabeth Volkenrath, and 8 other SS personnel were escorted in military trucks under tight security by British troops. Separate cells awaited them, individual units securely locked and under constant surveillance. British guards stood outside each door to prevent suicide attempts or any contact with the outside world. Each step echoed through the stone corridors, steady like the ticking of a countdown. A senior British military legal team conducted the final review. Each case was re-examined. Testimonies, evidence, verdicts. The documents were turned page by page, every line read carefully. The process had to be thorough, leaving no room for dispute. The names of all 11 camp commandants, female supervisors, were confirmed one last time. The original sentences were upheld. No further appeals were accepted. The date of execution was set, December 13th, 1945. Albert Pierrepoint, who had carried out numerous post-war executions, was summoned. All technical procedures were prepared and rigorously tested. Everything proceeded in secrecy. Only a small group of military officers, prison staff, and legal observers were permitted to be present. The goal was to ensure confidentiality and prevent interference from outside extremist groups. On the morning of December 13th, each condemned individual was informed privately of the time of execution. A British military chaplain was sent to each cell, offering to speak. Internal reports recorded no incidents or adverse reactions. Some, like Kramer, maintained a composed expression. Grese was noted for remaining silent. They were escorted out of their cells in groups, one by one under the dim glow of corridor lights. Footsteps echoed slowly across the cold stone floor. In the execution chamber, the procedure followed strict military protocol. Each prisoner's identity was confirmed, and final preparations were carried out. The site was closed off with only supervising officers, prison staff, and legal observers present. Each individual was brought in at the scheduled time. They were guided to the designated position, and every step followed the established procedure. The process was orderly. No resistance, no interruptions. British officers stood by in silence. Prison staff recorded the time and names of each execution. Legal observers monitored every step to ensure full compliance with regulations. The room remained completely silent. A heavy stillness filled the air. Afterward, as part of post-execution protocol, the bodies were handled and buried discreetly within the prison grounds, without marked graves. The purpose was clear: to prevent any attempts to turn these burial sites into memorials. The earth was leveled, leaving no trace behind. By the end of the day, all 11 executions had been completed. The Bergen-Belsen guards case was closed. Names like Kramer and Greasy became etched in history, forever tied to the consequences of crimes against humanity. After the Belsen trial concluded, its legacy endured. For the survivors, the struggle was far from over. Recovery, both physical and psychological, would take years. The Belsen trial was only the beginning. Shortly after, on November 20th, 1945, the Nuremberg trials began, focusing on the top leadership of the Nazi regime. Proceedings like Bergen-Belsen laid the foundation for modern international justice. Legal concepts developed in these trials would later be applied in other global contexts, including investigations in Rwanda and the former Yugoslavia. The story of Bergen-Belsen has since entered school textbooks, becoming part of global education curricula. Evidence from the trial, photographs, footage, and eyewitness testimony became critical materials in verifying and documenting the Holocaust clearly and officially. These documents are still archived and displayed in educational institutions and museums as part of the official historical record. Today, the original site of the camp has been transformed into a solemn memorial in Germany. It includes a museum, a cemetery, and commemorative plaques marking the locations of mass graves. School groups visit regularly. Survivors, now elderly, continue to return and share their stories. Historians still study the old case files. The Bergen-Belsen records continue to be researched and taught as a vital part of 20th century war crimes history. If you found this video helpful and want to learn more about history, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share it with others who may be interested. Your support helps us continue creating valuable content.